Welcome, everyone, to the Captive Audience. I'm Kevin Hoare, Red Hot in Blue Oregon. And we are here with an actual live show because we've had a lot of encore
Wow.
episodes lately as we coped with um, the election and all the things going on around it. And we are very fortunate to have with us here a real live Ed Deal, state representative from House District 17, and frankly, well informed to the point that Ed is somebody we go to get information about just about everything that's going on. And so, thanks for being with us here tonight, Representative Deal.
Great to be with you, Kevin. Red hot in Blue Oregon, I see.
Well, and why don't we start off with this? Because we're going to talk about the election and what happened in it, but
Yeah,
the election's still going on,
it is still
believe it or
going
not.
on.
And you've been at the center of chasing what's going on in Marion County in particular,
Yeah,
because there's a state representative race that's very close. And I believe it District 22.
House District 22.
Yep, which is Tracy Kramer, the incumbent Republican, and Leslie Munoz of the Democrat and Working Families Party. And on election night, Tracy was leading by about 500 votes, I think it
Yep.
was, something like that. And it has gradually dwindled and stayed in this too close to call category. And now she's down, it looks like about 150 votes, approximately
Yeah,
149.
149, I believe.
Yeah. And everybody's been out there chasing things like signature challenge ballots and trying to
Yep.
make sure ballots got cured so that they could discern the meaning of them and count them. And I think tomorrow is the last day they can cure ballots. Am I correct about that?
You are correct. Yep. That's the last day. So whatever ballots we can cure, meaning, yeah, we're going to the voter and saying, hey, your signature wasn't valid or you forgot to sign your ballot. So these ballots haven't even been opened yet.
Yeah,
And
so we don't know what's on them, but we're
right.
going to Republicans by and
We're
large,
going
right?
to, yeah, we're going to Republicans and likely our voters, and the Democrats are doing the same thing
Yeah.
with another group. So, yeah, there's quite a few. There's several hundred voters on that list, just in her district of ballots that need to be cured. And so we have a really good team that has been put together and is working that really hard.
Yeah, it's like get out the vote still is going on, but it's getting out the signature challenged
Yeah.
ballots. And by the way, a lot of folks might have heard about this or even experienced it where their signature doesn't match the one that they have in the record file.
Right.
And therefore, they get a letter, which I think they have like 10 days after they get the letter to go, usually, and respond. And you have to show up in person to fix it. I believe the leading cause of it is the fact that a lot of motor voter registrations use the signature that's on the back of that you sign your driver's license with. And of course, that's not really like signing a piece of paper, that's signing a piece of plastic on the back, which leads to maybe a signature that doesn't look very much like the one you sign your ballot on. Plus, over time, people's signatures change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our team had a gentleman who was elderly and just had very shaky handwriting, and his signature changes all the time. And there's a process for that.
Yeah.
That person can get a stamp, self-attest that he's going to use a stamp moving forward, just as an example.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was interesting. I'd never seen a cure list before that, but there were a lot of non-affiliated voters. Overwhelmingly, the number on this list that need to be cured are non-affiliated voters, which points, like you're saying,
Motor
they
voter.
they did the motor voter thing. But I know certain people, like my son, when he got back from the military, his signature didn't look anything like it did when he was
Mm.
in school. Uh, so so it got flagged, and he had to go update his signature.
Well, and non-affiliated is the default for anybody who doesn't
Yeah.
bother selecting a
Mhm.
party when they're automatically registered too,
Right.
through the motor voter.
And I saw somebody note, yeah, if Rep. Kramer loses this seat, then we're in a super minority in the House.
Why don't you explain what that is? Because
Yeah.
that's something that we've experienced before, and it's not pleasant, but we were
No.
just one seat above
So
that in the last session.
there's one thing we can do with 25 people in the House, and that is stop a tax. And if we fall down to 24, then the Democrats have a three-fifths majority. That's what's deemed a super majority. And then they can pass whatever taxes they so desire. And the Senate is already, we know they're in a super minority. So there'd be nothing
Yes.
stopping a tax increase. And we know that they want to do that. They want to increase the cat tax. They want to take away the kicker, which would be a referral. They keep coming after the kicker.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg here, because this red wave is, as you know, hit a big blue wall when it came to Oregon and Washington. It was very, I was very enthusiastic about what happened nationally on election night, but very disappointed about what happened in our state. We
Yeah,
got
we've
some,
seen this. We've seen this film before. The red
yeah,
wave hits and runs up against the Cascades and just recedes right at that
hmm
point. Yeah, which um, and the other thing is, I mean, they can refer taxes to the ballot, but they know that people don't like taxes, so that would so the minute they can get a tax passed without having to ask for a vote of the people, they do
yeah.
it.
And what amazes me is that voters let them get away with it. I've seen this all the time. I see bills passed that I know are not popular, would never pass scrutiny by the voters, but it still happens, and the voters just continue to reelect the same people.
Yeah,
Uh, in fact, we've got some serious problems in our state with crime and drugs and everything. We just promoted some of the architects of those issues. We promoted one
that's
to
right.
attorney general, promoted another one to Congress.
Yeah.
It just baffles me, but I think it also points to some issues we have with the integrity of our election system too.
We've got issues with the integrity. We've obviously got some issues trying to reach people with this information that you talked about so that they are aware of it sufficiently that it
Yeah,
weighs in on their vote, and meanwhile, Democrats spend all day talking about abortion in a state where it's enshrined in state law. And if that's influencing voters, uh, instead of all the things on the list that they hate that Democrats are directly responsible for, then obviously reaching voters with that message sufficiently. It's not like the media helps us either.
no,
They
but
don't.
it's just absurd that that apparently it's effective because they spent millions of dollars on ads claiming that if certain Republican House members win, abortion rights will be taken away. I saw just the craziest stuff said about friends of mine who were running for the state house, saying if they're elected, they're going to ban abortion. It's a flat out lie.
Yeah,
Um, it would never happen, even if that candidate wanted to do that, and he doesn't want to do that.
yeah,
It's not just. I'm thinking of John Masterman when I said that, but there were other candidates too that they were making that claim as well. They're just outrageous lies, and they spent millions of dollars promoting those lies. Apparently, it works.
and they're provable as being lies. They did this in Monique Despain's congressional
Yeah,
race. Val
yeah,
Hoyle ran $1 million worth of ads directly, um, deceptively conveying a message that contradicted what Monique Despain said in her own words in the same interview they edited, and that's how they roll. And I know that I approached people in the media to fact check this, and they would simply report that Monique Despain disagreed with the lie, which is interesting
Yeah.
because that's actually not being the referee when you do that. You're just saying. Imagine if the referee said, he thinks you fouled him. He thinks you fouled him.
Yeah.
I'm not calling any foul. I'm just going to say he thinks you fouled him. Uh, we no one would ever stop fouling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and it's, yeah, I don't know. I'm committed to getting abortion off the table in 2025. We need to make it so it's not a wedge issue in Oregon.
yeah,
And I think we need to realize where people are at on that issue, and they're not necessarily where I'm at on that issue. Most people are either pro-life with exceptions or pro-choice with limits, and
yeah.
those groups actually overlap.
They do.
And that's where I think the conversation needs to be, and we need to legislate based on where people are at on this issue, and then make incremental steps toward a life approach. But we cannot exceed where people are at. We can't go more extreme than where people are at on this issue.
Yeah. Yeah, there was some Oregon Health Authority data they reported today that just talked about late term abortions,
Late
and they're
term,
actually going up. They're going up.
they're going up, and that's something that is very unpopular with people. And I've talked to people who don't realize that there are no limits to abortion access in Oregon. They're surprised to hear that you can have late term abortions, but yes, it does happen, and it does happen often.
Yeah, which she said, are the issue set that we need to stay focused on falls right squarely into the category of what people care about. But coming
Yeah,
back to what you were saying about, the integrity of our elections,
yeah,
you shared with me an article that was just published 3 days ago in
yeah.
the Federalist, and the title of it says Oregon DMV busted allowing people of quote unknown citizenship unquote to register to vote. And of course, this has been going on since September, when they revealed that they knew since August that this was the case, right?
Yeah. Hi,
15.
George. Sorry, somebody chimed in there.
Well, I
Um,
know I'm not the famous man, so yes, this is Representative Ed Deal,
yeah.
George, and Ed knows this stuff cold and is literally in the middle of, like, we're watching this 149 vote margin that has
Yeah.
emerged from State Representative District 22 that could give the Democrats a supermajority. And we're talking about a state where there's 1,500 potential non-citizens that they know of, that
And
they've found so
yeah,
far.
we have to. There's a few things that people just don't realize, and we need to realize that we are what's called a self-attestation state. There is no requirement for you to demonstrate citizenship in order to vote. You check a box on the form that says, I am a US citizen. That's it. You don't present an ID to prove it. You don't show a birth certificate or passport, nothing. That's how it works. Millions of Oregonians have self-attested that they are citizens to vote in this state. There was one exception to that, and that was motor voter. So if you were being registered for your driver's license, and it depended on what kind of driver's license you were getting, they would automatically register you to vote if you demonstrated that you were a citizen. And what the DMV found is through that automatic process, they were making mistakes. They accidentally registered people who were not citizens, and they found quite a few of them, and some
And
of them
these are
voted.
people who said they weren't
Yeah, right.
citizens. Yeah.
So the governor has now said, well, we need to stop until we find out what was wrong with that program. So what happens in lieu of that? In lieu of the one process we had where we check for citizenship. Well, now the process goes back to the way it used to be before motor voter, which is if you do not prove that you're not a citizen, you will be asked to register to vote. So if you don't actually show that you're not a citizen of the United States, the DMV will offer you the opportunity to register to vote. And you go through the process of checking the box and all that stuff. You don't show any proof of citizenship. The Oregon Health Authority does this right now as well. They offer you to vote unless you demonstrate that you are not a U.S. citizen. So what the DMV discovered, I swear, is it's the tip of the iceberg as far as non-U.S. citizens that are registered to vote in this state. I have heard, I know this is anecdotal, but I've heard from multiple people who, where we have groups that are encouraging people to vote. They're encouraging non-U.S. citizens to vote, and what they tell them is, it doesn't matter if you're not a citizen because nobody checks. And that is the honest truth. Nobody checks. The Secretary of State doesn't check. The county clerks don't check if you're a citizen. In fact, they have very few tools at their disposal, even if they wanted to.
Yeah, they suspended the one that they did have.
Yeah. So I really think that, the federal law says you have to be a citizen to vote. And if a state's not actively enforcing that law, I think there's a court case. I think that the feds should come after the state of Oregon for not protecting our voter rolls. And here's the classic situation. The governor in the past has claimed, well, the protection is there's a huge penalty and there's a fine if you falsely attest that you're a citizen. Okay, I get it. That could be a deterrence, but show me where you find somebody. Show
Yeah,
me where you find
our
somebody.
entire election system is complaint driven,
Yeah.
which means that somebody actually has to know that you're registered and complain about it, and I guess present some sort of evidence to that effect.
Well, yeah,
And,
but we have the DMV found 9 people.
yeah,
That voted? I think it was 9. Are they being fined? No, they're not being fined. So we have the
and they
only
knew they
evidence we
weren't
have
citizens,
is
and
that
they knew they weren't
non-U.S.
citizens when they
citizens
voted.
have voted, and we're not fining them. I think there's a real court case here. But if I went today and I went to the county clerk, I said, here's a name that I suspect is not a U.S. citizen. Would you verify that for me? They'll tell you that they don't have a way to do that. Now, that's not quite true. I think there is a way that they can get that information, but it's not a tool at their regular disposal, and it's not something they check.
Well, and we're a sanctuary state, so they probably won't go to any federal authorities
No.
and request their assistance, which
Well,
means that what happens as people fearing deportation, especially the ones on
yeah,
the criminal list and the ones who have lost their asylum cases that were phony asylums anyway. I think it's like 90 plus
yeah.
percent are losing their asylum case in immigration court, and they're looking for a state that's going to protect them from the federal government deporting them. Oregon's one of them. That
Oregon
means
is, and
that we've got 11 million people at least that have come into the country. They're all going to go to the states where they've got the best chance of not being deported.
well, and Oregon, I guarantee you, again, we're in the minority in that building. The leadership will be doubling down on sanctuary state status. We already provide health insurance, free health insurance for non-U.S. citizens in this state, for every non-U.S. citizen. Uh, this is this is very expensive, and it's only going to get more expensive. And then when you combine it with the fact that we don't even check voter registration, I think it's outrageous. And in a normal election cycle, okay, we have a few. It's happening. I don't know how many it is. Does it sway most elections? No. But when you have an election like we have in Tracy Kramer's case, where she was up 500, as they continue to count, she's now down 149 in a district that has a large uh, non-U.S. citizen population.
Yes.
Then I question it. Then I say, hey, this may have made a difference. How can I check it?
You
Oh,
can't.
I know.
And we
I'll
will.
go to the sheriff and I'll see. Hey, could you verify that these names are citizens? They don't have that information. They don't know because they don't cooperate with ICE.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah,
And I think one of the problems too is that uh, as these things are reported and they have been reported around the country, we're fortunate in a sense that that the federal election wasn't as close, that the presidential election didn't come down to like the 10,000 votes that it did in some of these states in 2020, because
yeah,
we know in Arizona they found 200,000 people on the rolls that weren't citizens, and and then there were court battles where literally Democrats were in court suing to stop them from removing those people from the voter rolls.
yeah,
They
yeah,
did that in Virginia.
absolutely. Well, in Oregon, they did. They were identified, and I know I've spoken to the Marion County Clerk's office. They did remove all of the ones in Marion County. They removed them from the voter rolls, and they basically deactivate their voter ID.
Hmm.
And some of the ballots had been printed. Some of them had actually been mailed by the time this came about, but they deactivated those ballots.
So they wouldn't accept them when they came back
Yeah.
in.
And the other ones that had been printed that were queued up to mail, they went and pulled them. So they didn't end up in the mail.
But
But
these are the ones that they found, and we know there's more.
right. But here's how it works. Let's say you were on that list and your ballot gets removed. You can walk into the clerk's office the next day, fill out the application, check the US citizen box, and you're a voter again.
I'm laughing because I would have to cry if
Yeah.
I didn't laugh. It's that sad. It's that sick. And you're right. They're going to double down. By the way, I know in the fourth district race, one of the things that Monique Despain made an issue of was Val Hoyle's vote against something called the SAVE Act. And the SAVE
Yes.
Act was to actually compel states to clean their voter rolls and certify that there are no non-citizens registered present on their state voter rolls, and they uh, Democrats voted against it. It did pass the House, but Val Hoyle voted against it, and
Yeah.
their reasoning was at the time, I think it was April or May. Well, we don't need this because it's not happening, and then we have all this rash of these happening in different states.
And right, we know what's happening. We know what's happening, but we have no real idea how broad it is because again, we do not check. It's not
Yeah,
something we ever check. I don't know of anybody that's been fined. We have 9 that it just happened and they're not being fined. Um, uh, Rep Yunker and I we're going to introduce going to have the equivalent for Oregon, a SAVE Act for Oregon, introduce a bill.
right.
There's some other election reform bills that are coming, but I think the biggest thing that will help Oregon is if the feds take action and require voter ID. And I think ballot harvesting should be illegal as well, because that's being abused as well. So,
Well, I
but
think voter ID
voter ID, yeah,
and then a SAVE Act, those two
yeah,
things together.
and really investigate states that are not living up to their obligation to keep their voter rolls clean, to verify citizenship. Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, we
And
have, I see some folks are
this is
wondering what's
water,
in the
by the
glass.
way. It could be straight vodka, but it's water.
Well, I will say that I come equipped for captive audience. I've got water, and
And
then I have
wine. I
some
saw
vino.
that. Yeah.
Vino. So, the thing is, this is one of the specialties of our state. So I feel like I'm also just advertising one thing that's really good about
Oh,
Oregon.
you're doing it for the good of the state, huh? You're
I'm
drinking
doing it for
wine
the
just
good
for
of
the
the
good of the
state.
state. Well, wow, what a sacrifice.
I know it's a huge sacrifice, but it's one that I'm prepared to
Yeah.
make to keep promoting the good things about Oregon so that we
Yeah.
maintain proper perspective. But look, what you were saying about the issues too is important because when this is Oregon Watchdog is a great site, OregonWatchdog.com. It's run by the
Yeah.
Taxpayer
Oh, yeah.
Association. I just have it as my little homepage, and I come in and I look at it every day and before every captive audience. And that day, you can just peruse through the headlines. And it touches upon every one of these issues that we know were the top issues that people cared about. Here's one headline right here that
Yeah.
just says that we're not getting something solved. Um, Oregon Public Broadcasting. Oregon's first statewide housing report paints grim portrait of affordability. This is after they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on supposedly producing more affordable housing using um, ballot measures that have been passed mostly in the Portland metro area, um, but as well state housing funds and federal housing funds that are being channeled into this, all to produce a result like in $1 billion metro tax for homeless services, a $600 million metro bond for affordable housing in the Portland metro area, $376 million under the COTEC housing program that's going to supposedly build 35,000 new dwellings a year. $258 million a Portland bond ballot measure. And the headline is, after spending $2.2 billion in extra taxes and spending, we're worse off. We're worse off.
Yeah. Didn't the homeless count has gone up by a factor of 10, maybe, or 8, something like that,
It
after
has. And
over
then
$1 billion spent.
$1 billion spent. And by the way, it's not actually solving either problem because there's only
No.
two problems, right? There's a housing shortage for people who work and are trying to find a place to live that they can afford while they work, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the people who want to do fentanyl and meth that aren't in housing, they're in tents. Some of them don't even want to be in housing, but handing them the keys to a condo, not the answer to their problem.
No.
It may even hide it. And so, they're spending that much money and they're not solving either one of these problems.
No, they're not. It's very expensive, and there's so many problems with this housing first model and the harm reduction model. We're enabling this behavior, and society's paying for it. We're paying for it out of our tax dollars, and I just don't find it acceptable. I'm willing to help somebody who's trying to get clean, and but no, glass of wine. Okay.
He thought, well, if Kevin's going to have a glass of wine,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's time. Well, we've reached that point in the show because we've just had enough news that it's really time to go and say, all right, I need a glass of wine.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's just one of the issues.
Yeah.
We just talked about election integrity. I just saw that the Biden administration is going to trim Intel's $8.5 billion CHIPS Act grant. And that was supposed to be the great savior of Oregon's economy, was that we were going to have this massive influx of funding. And it's being trimmed, but it's being trimmed after also the new development that Intel is doing isn't happening in Oregon anyway. It's happening in Arizona and Ohio.
So I'm not up to speed on that as you are. So Intel is they're doing some R&D expansion in the
Some
Bay
here,
Area.
yes.
Yeah,
They say they're going to do a major expansion of their Oregon operations. What happened, and this played out in 2022, is that Kate Brown didn't return a phone call to Intel for a year.
yeah, remember
And
that.
Intel said, well, you know what? Then we're going to go and
We're gonna go
build
to
our 85-acre campus in Ohio.
we're gonna go to someplace a state that cares. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they can return a phone call to its one of its largest employers, if not the largest.
Well, I was reading the latest revenue forecast that just came out last week for the state tax revenue, and it's showing government public jobs are increasing pretty considerably, but manufacturing jobs and trade union jobs are going down. Skilled trades.
Skilled
So
trades.
that's not a good sign for any state. That's not a sustainable model.
And Democrats seem to be bewildered why working class folks maybe don't consider them to be their party anymore across the country.
So many of them feel like they've been abandoned
Well, and on the
by their
coast,
own party.
we know on the coast actually it's a big
Yeah.
problem too. They feel like they've been abandoned for decades once timber was literally chopped up as an industry and dramatically reduced and squeezed ever since then. And and they're left with tourism and fishing, which, you know, these are real issues. If these are the things that people, as you said, the architects of these problems, um, we are continuing to read. Here's another headline from today. Um, Police focus on drug dealing at downtown Portland's new hotspot. So we've got Measure 110 light and the changes that helped propel the Attorney General elect, former Speaker Dan Rayfield, to office, which is his claims that he did this wondrous thing of reforming Measure 110. And here we are. They're still going around stamping out ants. Um, and we're not seeing a huge difference yet in any of this. They did find that if they enforce the law, that stolen vehicles have dropped by 63% in Portland by actually going out and starting to arrest people and prosecute them. And that only happened because Mike Schmidt started getting worried he wasn't going to get reelected, which he
Yeah.
didn't.
So what you're telling me is when you enforce the law, people quit breaking the law.
Yeah, you get less crime.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
amazing. See,
That's
Democrats
pretty
thought the way you
amazing.
get less crime is you just don't charge people for crimes, and then
Yeah.
crime plummets.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Take that one to Salem, Ed.
Yeah,
Let
I
them
will.
know. Well, and so I was only cherry picking these, but this is like, oh, and it says Portland becoming $1 million housing market. So you talk about housing affordability, and regular homes are going to cost $1 million in Portland. Well, people are simply not going to be able to afford that. That's what created a sizable amount of the exodus from California over the last decade
Yeah.
was people just couldn't afford that, so they came to Oregon.
Yep. That's going to continue to be a problem. One thing that we're trying to do is raise the estate tax threshold. Uh, so I mean, it's one thing to have an expensive home, but then when you're inheriting an expensive home and you have to sell it to pay off the estate taxes. So we have one of the lowest estate tax thresholds, I think, in the nation. We raised it in 23 for family farms, but
Yep.
I'd like to see that threshold raised for
I remember hearing
for
about
household.
that from Representative Mannix.
Yeah, yeah,
The
he helped lead that charge.
it just makes sense for anybody who, because I mean, building assets is actually the key to exiting poverty and then staying out of it generationally, so that we end up having a society that doesn't end up, newly
Well,
impoverished people flowing
we
in.
I hear a lot of people talking about how to build generational wealth. Well, one way is don't tax the hell out of
Don't tax it so that it becomes government
it.
wealth.
Yeah,
Exactly. Duh. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we say these things, and after we complete the sentence, I'm like, I remember,
yeah,
uh, what did Newt Gingrich once said something in a speech? He goes, if you can't afford to buy a home, because you remember after the financial crisis in
hmm
2008, a lot of people were buying homes that they really couldn't afford, and the government was messing with the system, forcing banks to make loans to people who, frankly, couldn't afford to keep that loan once the variable
right.
interest rate went up. And he said, so if you can't afford to buy a home, what's the rest of the sentence? Don't
What
buy
he
it.
said?
Yeah. He said, don't buy it.
Don't buy it if you can't
Yeah.
afford to buy a home. Don't buy a home. Yeah,
Yeah. One of those, don't buy a home you can't afford. Okay. Duh. I feel like that's kind of what we talk about here sometimes. And yet we have a system and a government and leadership that don't bother with that at all. They just say, well, no, just do it anyway. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and we'll pay for it, or we'll write a blank check so that we can cover it later, and then we'll tax it when you try to pass it on to your children. Now, I thought before we wrap up here, maybe we
yeah.
could uh, do a little review of the rest of the election, nationally, what you think of that, and then there were some measures that we talked about quite extensively. Um, First of all, well, let's go through the measures, okay, and see how
Sure.
much time we have. Measure 115, that was the impeachment. That looked like that passed about 64 to 36.
Yeah, I think so. And I was comfortable with that one. I was recommending a yes vote. I know a number of I had some friends who were adamant about it being a no vote. Senator Linthicum was a no on that, for example. But 49 other states do it. We just joined them. It would take 40 votes in the House and 20 votes in the Senate. Those are huge thresholds in order to impeach. And frankly, what how that would have played out in recent years is if our recent Secretary of State, who was doing some shady things, Shemaiah Fagan, if she had not resigned, what would have happened? Our only course of action would be to let her ride out her term, or to recall her, which is timely and expensive. And so I think giving the legislature the ability to impeach makes sense.
Well, and it's a double two-thirds threshold, right? So it's not like the federal
Yeah,
one is just 50% in the House and then two-thirds in the Senate. This is two-thirds in both houses. And so when people said, I'm concerned about
yeah,
abuse, well, if you can't maintain the support of two-thirds of
yeah.
both houses, then
And
yeah, you got a problem.
and the negative was that it would be abused politically, and we've seen that play out at the federal level,
Yeah.
where impeachment charges are brought. They were brought against President Trump, um, just for to play political games. That's what they were worried about. They were worried. There was a worry. Well, if we get a Republican in statewide office, they'll just impeach him. Well, if we have 40 Dems in the House and 20 Dems in the Senate, we're not going to have a Republican statewide person anyway. So that risk is really it's highly unlikely. So
It's highly unlikely. Plus, that Republican would have to have much better relations with some Democrats to
to
effectively
even get that
govern.
there, yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, Measure 116, that was the Independent Public Service Compensation Commission. It looks like that failed 52 and a half to 47 and a half, which I actually thought that might pass. And I think it looked like it would early, but it failed.
I thought it would pass too. I was recommending a no vote on it, so I'm glad it failed.
Yeah. See? Another good call by
Yeah.
Representative Ed Dean. Measure 117 gives voters the option to rank. So this is ranked choice voting.
Yay.
And
Yay.
that one went down in flames. And we
Went down
pounded it into
in
the ground on
flames.
this show, didn't we?
Oh man, I tell you what, that was the one high point for me in this election cycle, because I put a lot of effort into that, as did a lot of other people. Really, a grassroots effort
Yep.
with no money, up against millions of dollars from out of state. I can't. I don't know what the final tally was. Eight
There
and a
was
half
seven.
million dollars.
Yeah, I thought that there was one entity in Virginia or something that did like the largest single donation in Oregon history to any campaign, and it was like 7 million or something insane. Yeah,
Yeah, they fought really hard to pass that ranked choice voting in Oregon, and I'm glad voters saw through it. I think a lot of voters in Portland were looking at their Portland ballot, going, the what the heck is this?"
that's
Uh,
right.
yeah, there
I
were a
was
lot of
wondering.
what I've heard is there were about 30%, 20 to 30% of the ballots returned in Portland did not fill out their city council section, which
Yeah, it was
had
just
6 rankings and 30 options for most of them. They
that's
just
right.
they just gave up. And listening to how this played out, it's exactly what I was going around preaching everywhere I went. These are the concerns. You're disenfranchising voters. They would tell me, "Oh no, no, that's not a concern. Don't worry about it." Well, it is a concern, and we saw how it played out.
And it raised the threshold for people being engaged and interested. It just said, look, I mean,
Yeah.
unless you're super duper interested and want to spend an hour researching these 30
Oh,
candidates, you're probably all those people that fell into that threshold, which is more than they used to,
yeah,
are probably the voters that you're saying you want to engage in these elections, and you're
yeah.
not going to.
Um, somebody's mentioning, Lori's mentioned, we Alaska was trying to reverse rank choice. We had help from Philip Izon, who is leading the charge to repeal ranked choice voting in Alaska, and he was great. He actually came down here. I was part of a debate panel with him. Had a number of discussions with him. He was very helpful. Uh, that repeal effort in Alaska is barely barely failing right now. I don't think it's going to make it.
Is it
It's
really?
it's within the recount, but it's down. And the other side spent over $12 million to retain ranked choice voting in Alaska. They pumped millions in there to prop it up, and apparently those millions might prove to be successful. They might win by a few hundred votes, but he's coming right back after it in the next election.
It says here 5 days ago, Alaska's ranked choice repeal measure fails by 664 votes,
Yeah,
and it's basically like a congressional district in population.
yeah.
And so that just 664 votes in a congressional race is a razor thin. That's what we
It's
have in some
tight. It's
places.
within the margin of error for Alaska, so I think there would be a forced recount, is my understanding.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see. It takes them forever to count votes up in Alaska as well.
And
Um,
who did they elected Nick Begich?
they did, yeah. So there's a Republican that
Yeah.
replaced the Democrat, so that's a flip.
So I love this one too, because when when I was going around doing my debates, we talked about Alaska as the example
Sarah
uh,
Palin.
where, yeah, and what happened in that race. Um, you know, the ranked choice voting people will say, well, ranked choice voting, you end up electing people in the middle. Um, and it's actually exactly the opposite. You end up
Yeah.
eliminating people in the middle. Nick Baggage was the spoiler in that race. Nick Baggage was the middle between a liberal Democrat and a conservative Republican. Nick Baggage was more viewed as the moderate Republican, and he was eliminated in the first round. And
Back in 2022. Yeah.
in 2022, leading to Mary Patola being elected. Uh, and during the debates, I would bring this up, and they acted like, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." But Peltola is the greatest. She's the most popular legislator in Alaska. She's great. What you're describing is nonsense. Well, look what happened.
Yeah.
They ran him again, and they didn't run anybody to the right of him, and he wins.
And it
So
made a difference in the national election because the Republicans are only likely to have about 220 votes after these last two
yeah,
races.
it's
There's
going to
three
be tight.
races, one in Iowa, one in California, which are leaning Republican. There's one in California that leans Democrat. Once those are declared, it looks like we're going to have 220 to what is it, 214 or something like that on the Democrat
Yeah,
side, and that's it. So this race in Alaska actually had national implications as well.
yeah.
So the other ones were Measure 118 got trounced. That was the
Trounced.
corporate sales tax minimum. Revenue tax to give free money to people.
Yeah. Uh, Somebody's grand social experiment for a universal basic income in Oregon, all funded by a guy in California who wouldn't have to pay for the tax anyway.
Yeah.
Can run his experiment in Oregon and see how it works out. Um, Oregon Business and Industry did an amazing job, and businesses across the state actually funded that campaign against Measure 118, and they were very successful.
Regrettably, they also spent their money on that instead of Republican candidates.
That is that's the sad part,
Yeah.
and it sucked up a lot of resources that would have gone toward Republican House races and Senate races, possibly even Lori's race and Monique's race. It it's unfortunate.
Measure 119, it passed. I don't know if I care, but there
Yeah,
was some concern that it was actually going to affect the free speech rights of
that
cannabis
was
retailers.
that's my concern. It's I was recommending a no vote on it. Um, I'm not anti-union. I'm just more free speech, and as a business owner, I have a right to make a comment if somebody's trying to unionize in my shop. I think I have a right to weigh in on that. And so, yeah, I was disappointed to see that pass.
So, what are your last thoughts on the national election?
Oh,
What's the implication? Because obviously, there's some pretty good stuff that happened nationally: the trifecta, the presidency, Doge. A whole bunch of stuff's going to start
oh man,
happening here soon.
I am so excited about that. But here's what I think is gonna happen nationally. So there's lessons to be learned for Oregon on how we campaign, I think, but I believe Trump is really a disruptor. He is going after, you can call it whatever you want, call it the deep state, call it embedded agencies. He's going after them big time. When you have Elon Musk and Vivek coming in to really redesign these agencies and make them more efficient and possibly even eliminate agencies, that's huge. And I'll guarantee you the fight he's going to get is against his own party, because a lot of those guys have relationships in those agencies. They've made their living, they've made their careers in that building, working with those agencies. The Trump's biggest battle will be against his own party.
Yeah, it will be because
Because
some of them will say, "Wait a second, we haven't done that this way. You can't do that." I'm afraid
yeah,
the Department of Education, we got to keep it, otherwise they'll say I'm a bad person, and there's all kinds of
right,
stuff like
right.
that. Well,
So
I think
it's going to be a tough battle, but I think it's these discussions have to take place, and so I'm excited about it. And
well,
our
I
own
think that, sorry, go ahead.
no our own Congresswoman Lori Chavez Dreamer being the Secretary of Labor. That's great. I think that's great for Oregon. And I think what Trump's trying to do is secure union votes moving forward. If the working class becomes Republican, they are already in spirit. Uh, if that happens, that's a huge momentous shift with voters, and that's a good sign for us.
Well, and I think that this means the battle for hearts and minds, the public relations battle just begins, because if you're
Yeah,
Doge, you might not be able to make things go away without Congress cooperating, but you can make sure everybody knows which members of Congress are standing in the way of what
right.
insane thing that's happening in our federal government that they won't change.
Right. So it's going to be very interesting to watch play out. The other thing that I believe needs to happen, we talked about election integrity reform. In Oregon, that's going to have to be directed by the at the federal level, and I
Yep.
believe that Congress has the authority to direct certain things, can require ID, can do other things as it relates to federal election that will force Oregon to clean up its voter rolls and do things on the up and up. So I'm excited about that.
So I would throw in two other things that I think are implications of the election. One is the Democrats are going to look to try and re-seize the moral high ground as deportations start. And there's going to be a battle, because I don't know how many Democrats want to make sure that convicted criminals can stay in the
Yeah,
cities,
and and I believe that I think we're on the moral high ground on that issue. I know that they'll claim it, but it is okay to say we need secure borders. It is okay to say, how my tax dollars are being spent. Um, and I think we have to realize that you can't just open your borders and have millions of people pour in who don't agree with who don't understand your culture necessarily, who don't understand your system of government, um, I, who don't necessarily share your values. I think that's a problem. That's a serious problem. And I'm not anti-immigration at all. I just think we should do it legally. We should probably expand legal immigration, but there has to be controls over that, and we've
yeah,
completely abandoned that. So,
yeah, I think
so
that especially
that'll be
when
a
it
real
comes to
interesting.
criminals running around in the country, I mean, it's
Yeah,
insane.
yeah,
Um, there's one other thing. I know you had a bill
yeah,
to this effect. This is the Republicans' one opportunity, while it's on the forefront, to do something about managing our forests to prevent wildfires. They even passed a bipartisan bill out of the House that is stuck in the Senate. It might still pass, but if they don't do it while they've got the trifecta, then they're not going to do it. And the fires, I think what 80+% start on federal land,
yeah.
and we could be harvesting that instead of breathing it. Be great.
Absolutely, and I think I've been reading the feds are recommending a change in policy to actually harvest timber to to clean up the fuels in the forest. They're finally realizing that, hey, that might help us reduce forest fire risk. It's like, duh, okay,
How many millions of acres had to burn
yeah.
before that was realized? But
So
it could really
I think,
affect Oregon in a big way.
yeah, I think that would be amazing if we can really implement that change, because that's something Oregon desperately needs. Not just we're sick of breathing smoke every summer, but those are jobs. They lead to healthy, robust forests that are better for recreation. It supports rural communities. It's like this win all around.
Law
And
enforcement,
yeah,
education.
yeah, to fund schools, law enforcement education, all that. So,
Well, there. So, on a positive note,
yeah.
cheers. I think that
Cheers.
we've just
Yeah.
summarized where we're at in the election, and we've gotten
Well,
our
yeah.
measures solidly behind us there too.
Well, one thing I did want, if we got a couple minutes, another lesson learned, I'd say, out of the election is looking at what these other states did. How did they? How did this red wave happen in these other states that have demographics maybe not as far to the left as Oregon, but still to the left? And one thing that I'm seeing is kind of the Republicans threw out the old playbook, the old campaign playbook, and they did a get out the vote strategy that focused on low propensity voters. They focused on voters that were not voting.
Yeah.
Um, some of them were younger men. They were working class people who were disengaged and disconnected, and it didn't matter how many millions of dollars worth of ads you pumped out at them. They weren't paying attention, but they had a ground game to go target those voters, and it worked. And numbers I'm hearing are like, you can spend uh, $10 going after uh, a suburban mom that's on the fence and doesn't know how she's going to vote, but she's a regular voter, or take that same $10 and recruit 10 new voters.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. And it is different than what I've seen done before. And it was effective. The voter turnout on the Republican side was tremendous. So I think that's a lesson that Oregon can learn.
And we did
We,
see voter turnout subside a bit in this state from
we
what
did.
was
We did
passed, and
by
it's
10 points.
30% didn't
Yeah.
vote.
Yeah. Which was very disappointing. And I look at Tracy's race, for example. She's down by 149 votes. 1,199 Republicans didn't vote in her district,
Wow.
and I guarantee a lot of conservative-leaning Navs didn't vote either. And so that's where I think the low-hanging fruit is for us, and we need to change how uh, we, we need to change our ground game and how we go after that.
Well, that's a good. That is that the final point that you had here? Because I think that's a
Yeah,
good
that's
one.
all I was going to say there. Yeah.
No, that's great because that means we have to demand that in this state because we could
Mm-hmm.
change its fortunes greatly here going forward.
Absolutely. So I'm
Well,
still
thanks, Brett.
optimistic.
I am too. So cheers to optimism. We're the
Cheers.
grand optimistic party. There we go. We're gonna fight. And I think that 2022 there's a lot on the plate. Or sorry, 2026 is a lot on the plate, um, but there's also a lot of contrast to draw, provided we do the right things.
Exactly. There is. And I think as the more people that are aware of what's going on in the building, the more it works in our favor because they are passing bills that we know are not popular.
Yep. Well, you know what?
We didn't
We're
talk
gonna have
about it,
to
but
have you.
boys and girls sports is not popular.
No,
Uh,
that's right.
it's not
That's right.
popular. We know that. But look who's on the side of truth on that issue. It's Republicans.
That's
The
right.
side of
So I
truth
think
and the side of women on that issue.
so. We should have you back for another episode here where we just talk state legislative stuff because we're going to start moving into that here because I realize we covered a lot tonight, but that's going to
Yeah.
be front and center, and it may be surprising to people what that state legislative session is going to focus on versus what they thought they were voting for.
Yep. I agree. I agree.
Well,
Oh, I'd
thanks
love to
again
come
for
back.
joining.
You
Yeah,
betcha.
thanks again for joining us here tonight. As always, it's been a fabulous episode and well informed. People watch Ed Deal and learn. So I'm glad that we could bring that tonight. But and so again, thanks for being on and for fighting the good fight and keep fighting that good fight in Salem. We appreciate it.
You bet. All right. Take care. Bye bye, all.
Thanks everyone for watching, and please share the show with everyone you can. And we'll be back with another episode of the Captive Audience tomorrow night. Have a great night.